Welcome to a special edition of St. Olga Interviews. We have a director of Remote Viewing Institute of quite large renown, maybe the most, which is called Farsight, and they are basing their experiments on practical uses for remote viewing, exploring our galactic history and the limits of consciousness and the sorts. And I've just been exploring their enormous library for the last week, and I can't recommend it highly enough. It acts as a perfect companion piece to my channel. So also, his name is Courtney Brown. You probably have heard of him, and doctor, I should say. Also joining us is as a host is Ileana, my friend, and she actually is just as well because one of our earliest topics of discussion was Farsight back when we met. And she is an SSP experiencer, also a psychic, although she didn't want me to disclose that to Courtney, but it's true. And yeah, we'll discuss remote viewing as well as a sort of highlights reel of the many important findings that have been derived through remote viewing that the Farsight Institute has come across. And yeah, shall I delve into the remote viewing aspect first? Is that okay?
It's totally up to you. I want to thank you both for having me on your shows. I've actually, both my son, Aziz Brown, and myself are very interested in a lot of the content that you have, especially with stuff talking about super soldiers and stuff like that. So I'm very pleased to be here.
Oh, that's great. And yeah, this is what I like most because it sort of acts as confirmation from outside source, and so the feeling is very much mutual. And yeah, I was wondering whether you believe that there is a correct way to do remote viewing, or that any methodology that yields results is ultimately fine.
Well, we at Farsight, we've had a few decades since the early 90s, since 1996, we've been focusing on the use of remote viewing and using procedures that are derivative of those that were used by the U.S. military. The ones that were used by the U.S. military that are even still out there today, we considered as a baseline, and then we modernized them. So we don't use those because the ones we use we like better, but they're derivative of the original ones. And basically what it is you have the ability to perceive things mentally, and that's been damped down for normal humans. And we train people to be able to regain those things. Why that has been damped down, we now understand. We've got a few decades of work on this. And with projects that we've been doing, we have a whole bunch of instructional stuff, but we also have a lot of exploratory stuff that we call mysteries projects. And we have over 50 of them. And the basic idea is that we have been going after recreating the history of mankind based on stuff that is just out there, the archaeological evidence. It doesn't make sense with regard to mainstream ideas, and then extraterrestrial life, including UFOs and things. And we have just found that the mainstream answers for all of this stuff is just totally bonkers. And then we went down the rabbit hole to try to figure out exactly what's going on. So cutting the story really short, and then we can expand on it later, the bottom line is that through all of our stuff that we have done, we have determined, and I can go into any level of depth you want, and I can actually give you absolute proof. I mean, proof. Very few people can say proof, but in a few minutes, if you want me to, I can give you proof that this is correct. The Earth is being run as a prison planet by authoritarian type ETs. There are another group of ETs, what we call free will ETs, and they are not dominant on the planet, but they're dominant in the solar system. There's more of those in the solar system than there are in the authoritarian ETs, but the authoritarian ETs are the ones that own the planet. They've got all of the political leadership, military leadership, everything basically tied down. So they're the ones that actually are flying so many ships. So that we actually end up seeing right in our atmosphere. The proof that I have for this, and it takes me a while to sort of connect the dots for you, but the proof that I have for this is that after doing a huge number of studies, basically using remote viewing for direct observation, using highly trained viewers to recreate the history of humanity, the last step is to prove to everybody that the ETs are real, that they actually exist. Because none of the mysteries projects make sense if there are no ETs. So starting in January this year, we couldn't start it until new camera equipment came out. But in 2022, new camera equipment came out, which allowed consumer people, prosumer people, professional people to shoot at 120 frames a second in infrared. So you have to have 120 frames a second in infrared. And when you have to shoot it in 4K, which means it's got to be a lot of resolution. Now, normal cameras cannot do that because they have a big sensor, 35 millimeter sensor. It's just too much information to write. They can't get that many for 4K. You can't get that much information onto the sensor and record it on the media. So we had to wait till these new cameras came out. Panasonic Lumix GH6 cameras came out in 2022, and they allow you to do it. We can shoot at 4K, 120 frames a second, and we can convert those cameras to full spectrum and then use infrared filters on top of them so we can pick the infrared band that we want. And when you do that, and we have started doing that in January of this year, when you do that, you see the UFOs. They're all using cloaking tech. They're all trying to hide themselves. They wouldn't be doing that if they were okay. They're up to no good. The basic issue is, how many are there? Even I, who have been studying them for a long time, I was surprised at how many. At any moment of the day, there's probably 20 or 30 right above your house. They're all over the place. And when we record for 10 minutes, we never record more than 10 minutes at a time. We typically get 20 different really clear instances of UFOs. And I'm talking about really clear instances. You can see the shapes, you can see them spinning, you can see them flying all over the place. And it's totally invisible light. And they're flying so fast. We record speeds very typically of over 120, I'm sorry, of over 20,000 miles an hour, which is 32,000 kilometers an hour. You can't pick that up with normal video when you're shooting 30 frames a second. You see one dot and that's it, and they're gone. You have to shoot 120 frames a second so you can watch them go across the screen. And they've been here for thousands of years, and they're desperately trying to hide themselves. You have to use specialized equipment. And if we did not have the specialized equipment, it simply couldn't be done. We have all of our mysteries projects and all of everything that we do. We were running into problems with YouTube, and we were worried about censorship because censorship is cutting across the entire internet. All the major social medias they're blocking or shadow banning. Shadow banning is most common. So you can have a channel, but no one can find you because you don't get recommended. And so we were concerned about that. So we have our own streaming service, which is equivalent in quality to Hulu, Netflix, Disney, Paramount Plus. It's run by Vimeo. And it has all of our projects, and it's called Farsight Prime, all one word, Farsight Prime, Farsight, prime.com. And everything is there. So we have our own streaming service, and we have a ton, so much information you can hardly imagine. However, we have also started to post our examples of the UFOs so people can see what we're talking about on my Instagram page. And my Instagram page is simply my name with the word Farsight after it. So Courtney Brown Farsight. Courtney Brown, C-O-U-R-T, B-U-N-N-E-Y, then Brown like the color, and then F-A-R-S-I-G-H-T. That's my Instagram page. And if you go there, you can see examples of these ships. lots of them, and we're putting them up as fast as we can. We're processing them. I can't put them up too fast because we have mysteries projects dealing with some of them, and I don't want our viewers, they have to work totally blind. I don't want our viewers to see these things before they do sessions on these things. So, but nonetheless, there's a bunch out there. So that's the proof. Now, in the past, it was always, I show you a picture and then you believe that UFOs are real. That doesn't work because we found out throughout the entire planet, there's debunkers in every major organization, in the media organization, in the political realm, everywhere. And no matter what picture you show them, Ileana and Daniel, no matter what picture you show them, they're going to say, nah, that's a smudge, it's a technical glitch, it's swampcast, it's whatever, but they're going to dismiss it always. However, they can't dismiss this because we're not saying believe our pictures. What we're saying is this is what we got, this is how we do it, and now will you go please get your camera, follow the instructions, and get your own videos because these ships are above your head all the time. Now, the initial ones that I got, so many were right over my house, like huge. There was a mothership right over my house. We have pictures where there are ships flying all over, cigar-shaped ships, the ones that are rotating, ones that are tumbling, going this way, that way, 20,000 plus miles an hour. And we also have another show on Farsight Prime called Identified Flying Objects. Identified flying objects, and that's hosted by one of our remote viewers called Intisam, and she has as the regular commentary for a technical analyst, Lincoln Lounsbury. He was one of the primary air traffic control people in like major airports all over the country, including for many years Washington, the Reagan Airport in Washington, D.C. And he's also been a flight a consultant for FAA, and he's published in the avionic journals. He's the best of the best in terms of air traffic control technical experts. They are the ones who are used to looking at the sky. He goes through our videos every month and he analyzes them, telling us the speed, the direction, whether it can be a bug, whether it can't be a bug, the whole thing, and he analyzes them. And then the next month we come out with a mystery, typically that has that stuff in it. But the Identified Flying Object show is saying, those people who say, it's a glitch. Okay, well, this guy's an expert. You can't get a better expert than that. And every month, there he is. He's analyzing our footage according to technical lines. And then if you still don't believe it, we just say, just get your camera out. And this is how you do it. Follow these steps and you can prove there's zillions of these ships. Now, if they were not up to no good, if they were just like people want to say, why don't they just show up over the White House and have a mass sighting? They would do it because they're over the White House anyway. We have lots of videos of them in Washington in the most protected airspace, right above Washington, right above the Capitol. But they're all cloaked. Everything is cloaked, but you can see them now finally, not because they did anything different, but because we did something different. We used different cameras that just now became available. So literally, Ileana and Daniel, in 2021, I could not give you the proof, but now I can. And for free, I can just say, whip out your phone and go to Courtney Brown Farsight on Instagram and look at some of the stuff. And then if you want to see them in bigger pictures, go to Farsight Prime and you can see whole videos of us analyzing them, plus analyzing the technical aspects of them. And then the remote viewing all makes sense. Now, this is important. You guys have both done stuff with regard to the super soldier community. Let me say this. We have found out for sure that there is a huge, huge collection of extraterrestrials in our atmosphere that are desperately trying to hide themselves. And we know all the story about why they're trying to prevent disclosure. They're up to stuff that they don't want people to know about. It's not like they're trying to wake us up and make us galactic citizens. There is actually a huge body of extraterrestrials that are in the solar system, but they don't really have access to Earth. It's like it's like going into Germany during the World War II when you have the Nazis and you sort of say, well, you just can't go in there. You just can't like go in there and sort of broadcast, go on top of Berlin and sort of broadcast to everybody, hey guys, let's have freedom, have free democracies and stuff like that. It's controlled by the Nazis. So that's what we basically have on planet Earth right now. So the free will ETs desperately need disclosure to happen. And they're the ones who have been tweaking the system from the beginning. They're the ones who are responsible for all these science fiction ideas coming out of Hollywood, the Matrix, Star Wars stuff, all this stuff, prepping the population for stuff, getting the stuff ready. The controlling authoritarian ETs don't want that stuff to happen, but they can't stop that to happen. They're basically in a Cold War situation where nobody does anything. But if you can actually get disclosure, then the populace of the world will rise up and say, we want to align ourselves with those guys. And then the free will ETs can intervene. However, the important point that I wanted to make is that the ability of us to do this only became available now. And that's why the proof is happening now. And why we didn't need the proof before is because we were building up a huge library of information so that people could access that once the proof actually happened. But now there's no question anymore. No one can call us deluded. We can call all the debunkers deluded because they won't pick up a camera. And, I'm not saying go to a special place, go to the Rocky Mountains, and if you're lucky, there might be one. Go anywhere on the planet Earth, set up the camera properly, turn it on, boom, they're there. Oh, by the way, this is the thing I wanted to say about the super soldiers. Before this came out, before we were able to show how many ships there are, we were always able to say, this super soldier idea is sort of crazy. What do you mean going away for 20 years and then coming back and being used as a mercenary force? But now that we know the situation and we can prove it to you that the ETs are there in huge numbers, it makes total sense. And if they weren't doing super soldiers, I'd ask, why are they not doing super soldiers? Because they're very authoritarian. They would use a mercenary force in a blink of an eye. There's absolutely no reason why they wouldn't do it. So for those people who say, nah, the super soldier thing is just too far out, I would say, you just don't know anything about the ETs. For those guys, it's not even close to being far out. And then if you say, yeah, but I don't believe in the ET stuff, then I say, well, then you're stupid because you're not looking at the data. The data is just get your camera out, prove it to yourself.
Totally. I think it's all about finding the chink in their armor. I think you might have found it there. It's about proving just the validity initially, because there's already mountains of documentation and evidence with regards to SSP and ET and remote viewing. So now it's about the clincher, the hook that people can't escape.
It's the clincher.
Yes. But there are countless examples. I thought I would just mention just a couple. For example, the fact that remote viewers by themselves can identify missing people that have been gone for decades, that police and private detectives that have been paid handsomely have failed to notice, to find. And they have, for example, one of them has a 50% ratio of finding these missing people. And just the most outrageous example I can think of is the guy, Joe McMonagle, who identified the fact that one of these missing people had half of his ashes buried in Korea and half in Japan. That's the odds of that, leaving that to chance, are just astronomical. So I wanted to throw it to Ileana because I know she has some experience with recording UFOs, and also I would say that it's a great use of these better, higher fidelity, finally a good use for these cameras that are coming out now. So Ileana, do you want to chime in about that?
Yeah, I have been taking photos of UFO craft, cigar triangle shaped ones, since 2016 with my DSLR camera, 85mm. It can take photos, your basic shape of what it looks like. It just doesn't zoom in. It's a photo. I have a catalog of 100 photos that I've put through infrared, and it has a heat signature. These things have propulsion, some kind of anti-grav propulsion. It has a heat signature. Everything has a heat signature. It's not planes, it's not helicopters, because it was soundless, like zero noise. And they hide in clouds. They like to use cloud formation to hide. Those pictures I'm cataloging into a book. That's my proof. That's the only thing I had, a DSLR camera. It was just photos, but that's what I have. So that's what I've cataloged, because they've flown over my house anywhere I lived, Surrey, Kelowna. They're there. Triangles, cigars, circles, bright lights, and they come out of hyperspace. They're there. It just hovers, moves quickly, does weird zigzags. Can't explain it. It's not your typical fuel propellant engine. It's something else that powers it. And then it zooms out into hyperspace and it's gone out of Earth field. So this is what I've encountered with UFOs above my house since 2016.
Ileana, the thing that I would add to that is you have been very observant and you have been studying this and you've been highly motivated. Now we're to the point where we can get anybody who's never done it before on their first time out to go out and get in a 10-minute video, like 20 examples of ships flying over their head. So not everybody is as observant and careful as you are to be able to do it even with photos. So now we've got to the point where we can get somebody with no past experience, even a tremendous skeptic, to see these things. So we're getting to the point where your experiences and your photos are logical and make sense and totally corroborate everything else that people can get. It's not that people can say, oh yeah, but I don't believe your photos. You probably did Photoshop or something like that. Because now you can say, oh no, okay, if you don't believe them, do them yourself. We now know how to do it like on the drop of a hat, anytime, during the day, in full daylight. And you can get these things without being so observant. And in fact, if you look up when you're doing it, you won't see anything. It's you have to take the footage and you put it into something like Adobe Premiere or DaVinci Resolve, and you have to process it, and then they pop out, and you can say, "Whoa!" Then the next question is, why are they hiding?
And I have a question for Courtney. So who are the free will ETs and who are the controllers, dictators? Like, do they have specific species names?
Yeah, we have. That's where our mysteries projects have come in. So we have trained these people. None of our remote viewers just like started. Then none of them are natural. They were all trained for about a year, full time, daily, every day. They would come in, do their sessions, and get training for this till they became really good at this. And they are really, really, really good at this. And some of them are extraordinarily good at telepathy as well. We have one viewer, Yeme Genet, used to be called Princess Genet, but she changed her name. Yeme Genet, she was legally blind for almost her entire life. And then she had an operation on her eyes where they replaced the lenses, and now she can see as good as a pilot. She sees great, but it was a major operation that recently happened. But because she was legally blind, she couldn't see the expressions on people's face. So to survive, she had to use telepathy in order to know if people are good or bad people. Well, when her eyes, but she actually could see with glasses, but they were the size of like the thickness of like the old Coke bottles. I mean, they were like huge. But now she can move around without any glasses at all. But the telepathy stuff stayed with her. So she and others, Aziz is very good at telepathy as well. They go into the heads of these ETs and nothing can stop us. We go right into them no matter what. So we not only know what the species are, but we know what's in their heads. And they're actually terrified, to be quite honest, when Yeme Genet shows up, because she's totally fearless. And they know they can't stop her. She's going to blast right through no matter who they are. At the top of the totem pole, in terms of the groups that are the most authoritarian, are the reptilians. They are at the top, and they keep themselves out of sight. They don't like that. No, they don't want people to even think that they exist. We now know that they have underground bases. We know exactly where some of the underground bases are underneath Area 51, not at the initial lower levels where like Bob Lazar did his work and stuff like that. But deeper in areas in levels that the humans basically don't go. That's where the reptilians are. And so they're connected with Area 51. They've got elevators that go all the way down from the top, all the way down. Most humans don't go very far down, but if you kept on going with the same elevator, you'll get to the lower levels. And but the reptilians, control who gets down there, but they can't stop us from getting down there. So, but there's definitely reptilians, and they have ships that look like Klingon birds of prey. They're triangular type ships. And they are pretty much terrified when we show up, especially when Yem. I think there's a theory we have that Yemejane may have been a reptilian in a previous life. She goes right in and goes toe to toe, and she taunts him. You can't stop me. I'm going to get in. You want to tell me what I want to know, or I'm going to go in anyway. And they know that. And we have actually had a situation where we had some reptilians almost begging her not to go through the wall because they thought she would be badly affected if she saw what was on the other side, like they're trying to protect her. That's why we have some suspicions that they have sort of an affection for her, like they may recognize that she may have been a reptilian at some point in time, but they know they can't stop her. And anyway, and same with Aziz, he plays games with them. They try really hard to sort of stop them from seeing things, but he just relocates himself and comes at it from a different angle. But yeah, the reptilians are at the very top. And then they have others, different species. I don't like to simply say grays because grays are all over the place on both sides. So you can't just, it's like saying humans are good or humans are bad. You get humans on both sides, all over the place. And so you get humanoid people also that are on both sides. But at the very top, you get the reptilians. And by and large, there may be some good reptilians that work with the free will people, but they're rare. So they're very rare. So mostly when you're talking reptilians, you're talking a very authoritarian mindset, and they're at the top. We have found out that they themselves are controlled by an AI, that they actually are slaves of somebody else, but we don't see the AI. We see the reptilians. And in terms of what we interact with, they're the top. And they're the ones who made the deals with the US government and some other governments to operate on Earth. And that's why they basically control the planet, because of those deals that were signed. And then there are humanoid ones, and that are coming out of an area that you know of called the Orion sector. And those Orions, they look human, they look like us, but they came out of a very authoritarian political situation. And they're competitors with the reptilians, but they have a alliance right now. So they're allies of convenience currently, the reptilians and the Orions. The Orions look like us. The reptilians look like reptilians. They're big, scaly, things like that. So those are the ones sort of at the top. If you want to look at the examples of the Orions, all the major players in terms of history were all the Greek and Roman gods. For example, Zeus. Zeus was the rapist. He was basically a prison warden who was a serial rapist, and that's what he was. And he was an Orion. He was someone who was assigned to rule the planet. He was a prison warden, is what he was. And and then, but the reptilians sort of kept themselves separate from, but there's an uneasy alliance. And currently, right now, they have agreements between the Orions and the reptilians with, say, the US government and some other governments as well. Chaim Eshed, the former head of the Israeli Space Directorate, has fully admitted that there is written agreements between the Israeli government and the ETs, as well as the US government and the ETs, in order to operate here. And there's a little bit of language confusion now, because the authoritarian ETs are starting to have human collaborators use the words Galactic Federation to represent them as well. So you can't say the words Galactic Federation anymore and assume you're talking about the free will ETs, because the language confusion is purposeful. But generally, we use words like free will ETs, and then we used authoritarian ETs. The free will, and I just put up we just put up a video. It's an intelligence briefing. We just put it up this morning. It happened yesterday, where I went through my own background in terms of my own personal contact with the extraterrestrials. And it's up on farsightprime.com as well as YouTube. We put it up there for free on YouTube as well, because it's so important to establish my background. It's something I have kept hidden forever until now. And now I have to, you can only define yourself once, and disclosure is coming really quickly. And so I don't want my opposition to define me and talk about me beforehand and reveal all this stuff. So the time has come where I really had to sort of tell people about my own background with extraterrestrials. And so that really just came out. And that in that video that I have now posted out, I openly state I am part of the free will ETs. I work with them. I have been doing their stuff for decades. And I was born here on Earth as a normal human, but I wasn't recycled here. I came from outside, and I came here with a plan to do this stuff. And I'm not the only person doing this kind of stuff. You guys, in fact, are doing this kind of stuff. But the issue is that this was a process, this was a plan, and I had a part to play. And my son had a part to play, and this is what we're doing. And I finally sort of just came out with all the details so that people can sort of know that as sort of part of the disclosure process.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So the free will ETs, are they the Essassani, what kind of species are part of the free will ETs?
We call the Essassani a slave group, and they're part of a gray and hybrid group, and we find them to be directly working with the reptilians, and they are very clever in producing lots of good vibration stuff that you see on the internet. But they never tell the dark side. They never tell what's really going on. They always say disclosure is just around the corner. You're trying to become a galactic citizen. We're trying to wake you up, and all that kind of stuff. And that's all crap. None of that's correct. They're actually part of the process of keeping the New Age community bottled up, thinking something's going to happen when in fact nothing's going to happen. They're never talking about the idea of the truth of the matter, that this is a prison planet. They talk about the idea about the Greys coming from a planet where they destroyed their own environment on the planet and now needed to create hybrids in order to save their species so that we feel, okay about that. That's all bull. None of that's happened. The Greys are everywhere. They're all over the galaxy. It's a synthetic life form. They have them all. They have them all different varieties. And some of them are not synthetic. Some of those, but they have their own. They're everywhere. They're part of the free will ETs. They're part of the authoritarian ETs. There's no single planet that they came from where they destroyed their environment, and they need us in order to bring back themselves. That's all part of a song and dance as an excuse, so the people will feel that they'll cooperate with a hybrid program that's going on. And the hybrid program is to continue a long-term enslavement of the planet and the population. You have to understand there's 6 billion people on this planet. And in the wings, we don't call people souls or spirits. We call them isbis, someone who is simply for the purpose of being. And when the body dies, and the body does die, the isbi is still there. And so when what they have is they have like zillions, maybe 30 billion, I don't know, I'm just guessing, but billions and billions of isbis that are not in physical form, but are in the wings. Nobody can get out. There's no process. There's no way to get out of this place. Okay, select people can be picked up maybe by an ET, free will ET ship, but in generally, all the billions are stuck. It's a prison. They can't get out. And when they die, they get recycled. And something like that, we call them death traps. Now, all the death traps aren't working as efficiently as they used to, but nonetheless, people get recycled. You die, you see the light. And isbis are attracted to aesthetic things like the lights. You're sort of drawn in. And then the closer you get to it, it becomes like a trap. The more you struggle, the more you get caught up in it. And then once you're deep inside, you get an electroshock treatment. And the electroshock treatment, it scatters you. You cannot kill an ISB. So all those people who think you need to pray and get on your knees in order to have eternal life, forgiven for your sins, that's all stuff that was created by the authoritarian regimes, authoritarian ETs, in order to enslave the planet. It's a mindset type of thing. Ideas enslave people. And so what happens is when you get rattled with this electroshock treatment, you lose your memory of who you were, and you lose the ability, at least temporarily, to do telepathy and remote perception. And then you get, and it's all done by AIs at this point. So, and then you have information sort of snuck back, inserted back in you, giving you a past, a history. And part of that is very often when you have near-death experiences, part of the process is where you see a council of elders. These are all AI elders. And they say, we think you need to work on a few more problems in order to get your personality right. There's a couple more issues. You've been around for millions and millions of years. You don't need another lifetime to work out a couple more problems. And so it's just another way to make you voluntarily go back into the system. And so what you basically have is a system that needs to be unraveled from the very start. It so happens that this is such an efficient prison system that people have been dumped here for all types of reasons. So the reality is that's when you see all these like mass shootings and pervert type stuff that happens with tortures and everything, those people were dumped here from all over the place because they didn't want them where they were. They were crazy people. On the other hand, a lot of creatives, inventors, artists, people who like to shake things up, they were thrown here too, because you have a society where they've invented everything that they possibly can invent. They don't need an inventor trying to recreate the wheel. And they irritate people and artists. That, you know how artists are. They're always trying to do something unusual. That irritates a lot of societies. And a lot of societies just can't tolerate that. If you look at some of our own semi-authoritarian or semi-authoritarian regimes on this planet Earth, you get them having very low tolerance for things like art. Artists and stuff like that, pop stars singing and stuff like that, and they put them in jail or they banish them or whatever. Well, that happens all over the galaxy, so they throw them back in here. So this has one of the highest concentration of geniuses and artists anywhere in the galaxy. So once disclosure happens, we have an intellectual pool that's spectacular, that can focus on these death traps so that this whole thing can be unraveled. They're apparently very difficult to disassemble and find and unravel. So that's a big project that needs to be done. But anyway, that's how this whole thing sort of goes on.
So one of my big aims, which I think I share with you, which my channel is to address this information to people in authority, so as for them to share it forward, because it's all about catering to that one person, really, because they can make the big difference. So I was wondering if we could address from a skeptical point of view, because all the information that you just listed previously is derived from your remote viewing. So if we could go over some maybe rapid fire questions about the process of remote viewing and why it is valid.
Sure.
Cool. So in your experience, have you noticed whether remote viewing is an innate ability, whether bloodlines play a role, and things of the sort? What is usually the characteristics of a good remote viewer?
Well, explain the question a little bit more in terms of what you need to know. Okay, I just can say a little bit more about it.
Sure. So are you constricted by, say, having a certain bloodline, or is the process of remote viewing open to everyone?
No, there's no restrictions. As an ISB, you have that normal ability. Out there in the galaxy, the normal way of communicating with people is telepathic. You have to be able to communicate across species. You have a zillion species in one ship. In one ship, you'll have grays, you'll have human types, then you'll have reptilians, you'll have everybody there, and they don't all use English. And they may use some sounds. Some species don't use sounds at all to communicate. Everything is just telepathic. And so you know, in fact, something I may say, there's a professor, David M. Jacobs, who came out of Temple University. He's just retired. He's written a number of books, but the most recent book that he wrote is Walking Among Us. And he focuses on people who have been abducted. Now, his view, his research is really just coming out of the abduction experience. So he only gets one side of it, but he gets that side of it really well. And so he actually, he's made very few mistakes in terms of that type of sort of setting. So what he finds is, he calls it like neural engagement and telepathy, but the basic idea is that mental communication and mental manipulation is a primary thing among ETs. Well, we were all ETs. I guarantee you, you guys were not from here. You were someplace else before you got here. And when you were someplace else, and everybody else you meet at the grocery store, at the gas station, whatever, they came from someplace else, but they lost the memory of where they came from. That's a product of the death traps. Now, the death traps don't affect people if you're coming in from outside. You don't get caught up in that. The death traps happen when you're trying to get out. When your body dies and you pop out of the body and you see the light and you're sucked in, that's the death trap experience. However, the bloodline that's just fiction. It has nothing to do with your body. It has nothing to do with your bloodline. It's part of the ISBE stuff. The body is nothing. It's meaningless. Well, it is nice to have nice hair and to have makeup, because you're an artist and you're trying to make yourself look okay. It's fun to use the body, to have a lover, to have makeup on, to dress up and to go to the opera. Those things are fun, but it's not you. And the bloodline has nothing to do with it at all. Whether you have telepathic abilities, are capable of doing remote viewing naturally, it just depends on whether you've been processed by the death traps. If you're not been processed by the death traps, a lot of this stuff comes naturally anyway. And there are people, lots of people who are here that have not been processed by the death traps. Normally it happens only when you start recycling.
Mm-hmm. One of the most underrated aspects of remote viewing that I found is the fact that it's dependent on the time of day that you perform it. In terms of the psychic functioning, seems to be exponentially bigger at a certain time, or at a certain point of sidereal time, which is measured relative to the position of the stars as opposed to the sun. Apparently, as much as 4 times as effective if you do it at 3:30, 15:30 sidereal time, which you can measure online, and that means you're looking away from the center of the galaxy, so you have the least amount of cosmic noise. And if you're looking directly at the center, you have by far the least efficiency, way below average. Do you actually employ that? And this statistic has been, gathered from thousands or tens of thousands of remote viewings. I was wondering if you can incorporate that. Have you heard of this?
Of course, I've heard of that. That was a very interesting piece of research, and that really rattled around the remote viewing community a lot. And then it was retracted by the original author. So it doesn't work. It was a belief that came out because of that original research. But then that original research, the author says, made a mistake, sorry. So it's been totally retracted. We don't notice any difference whatsoever by any type of time. However, we do notice something. Your belief system is very important. So if you believe that sidereal time is so important because you read that article and you saw that you believe, then your remote viewing sessions are going to be much better on sidereal time when you do it at that exact time. But if you don't get involved in that in the first place, it makes no difference at all. People use telepathy all the time. It doesn't work just on one time of the day. They use it in the morning, in the afternoon, in the evening. That's how they communicate. That's how they do their job on the ships. That's how the captain of the ships can't say, I can't tell you what to do because it's not sidereal time. So we're going to have to wait till the right time before you can get any instructions on what to do, on where to go. That doesn't happen. So this sidereal time is just, I understand your question, where it came from, and a lot of remote viewers still to this day believe it, but it was retracted by the original author.
Cool.
Is it possible to do spontaneous remote viewing where you just start seeing things and things are flashing at you, and then you have to make sense of what you're seeing and you're drawing it, describing it? Is that possible? Can it happen spontaneously?
Absolutely. In fact, the term spontaneous remote viewing is a thing. Spontaneous remote viewing is sort of normal and natural, especially if one has not been processed by the death traps and you sort of have a natural thing. That's what normal people do if they're not on Earth. There are a couple things that inhibit it. A, being processed by the death trap, so you come back after having the zapping experience. Then you really have the difficulty having that type of thing happen. The other thing is if you happen to have a belief mindset that it's impossible. So I can tell you the best way, verified scientific, to eliminate all spontaneous remote viewing possibilities and telepathy, and that is to get a PhD at a major university. Because they drill it out of you. The mainstream says this cannot happen, none of this stuff can happen, and so you believe it, you believe it, you believe it. But if you just chill out and let things flow, one's natural ability has this stuff all the time. That's the way it's supposed to happen. The difference is with the remote viewing that we do at Farsight, it's highly structured because we can't have these perceptions just sort of float in. We've got to get them at a defined order. We have to get them in a way that we can make sense out of them afterwards. So for us, we can't do a spontaneous remote viewing. We have to have organized remote viewing. However, Ileana, it's a good question because we have one procedure in all of our procedures which we use, which we do many, many, many times. And that's to elicit something that's very similar to spontaneous remote viewing, which is a flash sketch. Now, a flash sketch is where we close our eyes, your head goes up at a 45-degree angle, you imagine a black screen, and boom, something flashes. And real quick, you just write it, you just sketch it out. So we use those flash, and we do those many, many, many times during the sessions. So that's a sort of an organized way to get that exact thing that you asked about, which is spontaneous. The difference between spontaneous remote viewing and flash sketches is that with spontaneous remote viewing, you didn't ask for it. It just sort of happened, and you don't know when it happened, but it was good. So the question is, if it was good, can we have it on demand? And that's what the flash sketches are.
Yeah. So basically, there's no actual need for blindness if you can let go of all the assumptions. It's just that it's difficult to do that and to let go of your ego, I guess. But also, I was wondering if when you are remote viewing, and I'm sure you're gonna sway strongly on one side here, but whether you're accessing or stealing information from the Akashic or an objective record, or is it more of an open sharing of information as with just observing something?
The Akashic record is a belief system that many people have. We don't have, there's no Akashic record. What is going on is you're going to the real thing. You're actually seeing in real life, whatever it is. What we basically do from a scientific perspective is we now have a good argument for the generalization of quantum mechanics. And what basically it is, normally physicists say, you know how you say what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas? Well, they basically say what happens in the quantum realm stays in the quantum realm. And then they have a line they call the line of decoherence. And then on the macro side, the big side where we have us, that's different, and they don't mix. And so they have a set of rules for the quantum realm and a set of rules for the macro realm. The macro realm, of course, is classical physics, classical mechanics, and general, special and general relativity. So, and then in the quantum realm, they have a whole bunch of different rules. Well, all those things that we see happening with remote viewing, we see happening in the quantum realm. So the basic idea is when someone's remote viewing, their is-be self is not traveling to those places. they're not looking it up in a library in a Dewey Decimal System of the Akashic record. They're just shifting their perception, because ISBs, by your very nature, are omnipresent. They're everywhere at all times. And ISB is a piece of the fragment of whatever it is. That's all there is. And so what you're doing is you're taking part of yourself and you're just sort of refocusing where you are. So you're not looking something up in a card catalog. You're actually going to that exact place. And that means that exact place can be in a different time as well. It can be in the past, it can be in the present, or it can be in the future. But you're actually going to you're going to that location. When we did a whole project on two things that were reported in Tony Rodriguez's book, what was the name of it?
Series something.
Series Cavalier.
Yes, that was well. We picked. I read his book, and it seemed very genuine to me. So I just created a mysteries project, and I assigned the mysteries project to two separate instances, and they were written in the book just to see if those instances actually happened. And they did. They were there. Now, who knows when Tony Rodriguez did that, because he was part of the so-called 20-year out and in type of a process. So there's time travel involved in that process. Well, ISB's time is just like that. So once you're plucked out of the body yourself, you can be assigned anywhere. And he had a situation where one of his bodies sort of burned up, and Crispin had to get a new one, actually during the process. And that's what these ETs do all the time. If they have a body that doesn't work or breaks, they take the ISB pops out and they put it in a new body. And so the body is just a thing. And so the idea of us going to see Tony Rodriguez, those things that he said, we don't know when that happened, but apparently it happened at a different time and a different place. And we went to the exact location and watched it happen. And in fact, it did. Some of the people who had actually done the remote viewing had never read the book, didn't know the story. You wouldn't believe how chilling it was for me to look at the videos, because these are all done blind. I don't know what the stuff is until they do everything on video, and I watch the video afterwards to see. They do their sessions on paper. Actually, to be honest, they don't do it on paper. We have them all use iPads. So everything is digital now, but in the old days, it was paper. So we still refer to it as paper, but they're actually writing on iPads. So they do their work starting out solo, and then they end up solo on video. And they do their video, and then I get the video and I edit it, and that's when I see what actually they do. And it was really chilling to see some of them describe the Tony Rodriguez story of when he was on Mars and confronting with the large insectoid beings. And you had people like Princess, like watching, and Aziz just watching the whole thing and describing these insect beings exactly as they were in the book. And Princess's session was almost as if it was like close to plagiarism in terms of the book. I actually in our project, I put out a paragraph where Tony Rodriguez is describing what happened when that large insectoid was right on top of him and going into his head to find out if he was a good guy or a bad guy, whether he was going to kill him or not. We had Princess go in and do the same thing and look at the thing. She described the exact same insect going into Tony Rodriguez's head, and the little insects on the side, everything that was there. I was talk about, the hair on the back of my head sort of standing up. It was it was freaky. I mean, I've been doing this for a long time, but it still is a little freaky when I see it. But yeah, so that's across time and space. So Daniel, she didn't go into a library and read about it. She went there, and that's what everyone has that capability of doing. That's what we try to use the word Akashic records as a way to sort of describe these perceptions that we have out of time and space, because we're sort of used to the idea of a library, but it's not a library. You actually you shift your awareness to a different point in time and space, and you watch it. the original. The original. There's no reason for a library because you can go and see the original.
I agree. And actually, I just want to say that that remote viewing was actually the most uncanny of all. My personal favorite is the crucifixion ruse. I really think you open and shut that case from every angle, and it's sort of perfect, even though just one viewer. But the SSP one was the most significant, and it made the rounds. Believe me, in the SSP community, everyone was sharing it and stuff. And yeah, almost unfairly accurate, I would say. And also, just before I go on, it also revealed the fact that Tony was psychically helped actually to remember in this remembrance process by Janine, I forget the
Jackie
name.
Yeah,
Cannon.
yeah. At that time, at that time, she called herself Princess Janae, but now she calls herself Yeme Janae because the word princess has been overused, so she wanted to redefine herself. But yeah, she had she went into she felt she perceived the blocks, and she perceived that other beings were trying to block him, so he wouldn't remember. And she didn't like that, and she went deep. She used to telepath. You know, they're all telepathic. These kids, these remote viewers. But when, to be quite honest, when we need something that's going to be hard, we save it for her. That she goes in because she was blind before. Her telepathic skills are extraordinary, and she goes in. And I know sometimes with some of our sessions, we record actually with some of the sessions we have what we call an interviewer, because the sessions are this is not when they start out, but sometimes in the middle of the process we have an interviewer, because we have to, the interview is highly trained to sort of watch them do their session, so that if they pick up on something that we need them to follow through, we don't have to assign them a new session, which can end up going on for 6 months. But we just say, oh, no, pursue that or pursue this. So I was the interviewer for Yeme Janae when she was doing the Tony Rodriguez stuff. She already finished her solo stuff and everything like that. But I was the interviewer when she did one of her sessions. And I was I have my mic on mute, and I have my webcam closed. So it's like this. She can't see me and she can't hear me. And I'm just watching in case something happens that I need her to pursue. And I didn't say a thing for that whole session. I was like silent. But when she got to Tony Rodriguez and she felt the blocks being put in, she like, I'm going to try to describe what it was like because I was watching it. Okay. It was freaky. It was freaky. And I'm used to it. She like frowned and she went silent. And she's working on her iPad. She like wrote it. I was saying, what's going on? She was silent for like 7, almost 10 minutes. She was just silent. And then she said the words, "You will remember." And then I realized what was going on. And she had described previously that somebody was trying to put the blocks, and she put it deep. "You will remember." I tell you. You can't make that up. And when I watched it, I was sitting in this exact chair, and I was just watching it. I was literally going like this to the screen, wondering what's going on. I was on mute. My webcam was on blank. She couldn't see me. I was just looking. And then I saw her say it, and she said, "You will remember." Because I had read the book. "You will remember." And I went like this. This is what I did. My God, she did it. She did it. She was the one who did it. That's why he was. And that, remember when he went at the very end, and they were trying to decide if they were going to give him a lobotomy or just let him go. And they said, "Oh, he won't remember anyway because it's whatever complication." So they let him go. That was Yeme Janae. That was why they couldn't fix it. That's why they couldn't put the block in. It was freaky, but you have to see it yourself when Yeme does something like that. It's like there's no space and time. When they're watching it, it's like I was feeling it. It's like I was there, and like it's hard to describe, but it's like a psychic power that sort of permeates everything when there's that much focus and concentration. And you just, my eyes just popped out. My hands went up. I said, "Oh my God!" So she did it. Anyway, I'm sorry I sorry I had to spend so much time on it, but it was one of the freakiest experiences that I had in that whole project.
And Jackie Kenner is a psychic who helped Tony to write the book and edit it, and she's had her own secret space program experiences. So he worked with somebody who's very trustworthy and understood him to help him with the book. So it's like when you work with somebody who understands you, they don't doubt your process. They help you along with it to make it what that book is. So that's sorry I said Jackie Kenner earlier. It's because he worked with her on this book, and they've also created stuff to help people remember their memories of what's been mind wiped or blocked. So she was part of his process, and he's just written another follow-up book with Jackie as his editor.
Yeah, I have it. I haven't read it yet, but it's on my couch. I just got it the other day.
Yeah, and
Apparently it just came out.
yeah, that was impressive how she went back in time, you could say, and switched and made his whole recall possible. Actually, my most, you could say, at the time I was even more impressed with her exploits was in the remote viewing of Lucifer, and when she finds, she actually gets intercepted by what I can only assume is Yahweh at the end. That was so out of the blue. First of all, to even find out so much dirt, you could say, on Lucifer, and to expose who he is, because there's so much mystery there. That was another must-watch. There's so many. But in regards to overall remote viewing, have you noticed whether there is more fruitful outcome if the target is a more life and death or urgent situation, or do you find that pretty much if you give the right target, you can hit home, you can strike gold with anything?
Well, when we teach remote viewing, actually with our remote viewers themselves, we don't teach here at Farsight, but we have free instructional videos, a huge library of them up on farsightprime.com that are free for people to use. They just have to have an email. But when people want personalized instruction, they go to Yamijane, or they go to Intisam, or they go to Shanpei. So those are some of our remote viewers. Now, we don't take a cut in any of that. They do that on their own. We support that, and we want them to succeed, and we want them to teach people, but we're not like, it's not like an extension of Farsight. We're taking no one gets any financial benefit from that. They just do that on their own. But when they do teach remote viewing, they learned it all from here. They learned it from me and from Aziz, and from Yamijane taught some of them as well. Yamijane was one of the people who taught Intisam and Shantae, for example, and so on. But when they do teach, they teach with targets that are just sort of standard physical targets, because people have to be able to describe physical things under totally blind conditions, like the Eiffel Tower, the sinking of the Titanic, the Empire State Building, the Mount Everest. They have to be able to describe those things. So for those things, those targets are, those are not like space things where there's battles going on or anything like that. Those are sort of what you might call boring targets. But during training, they're incredibly exciting. During training, the adrenaline is really rushing when the brand new viewers, come back with perfect sessions of Mount Everest, or the Empire State Building, or the crashing of the Twin Towers, or the destruction of Nagasaki. I mean, when they get these things during training, simple ones, those are big for them, and they have no trouble getting those things once they learn how to do the procedures, and they learn how to focus on the right type of thing. However, if we were to have our best remote viewers do those constantly, it would be pretty boring, because they're so used to stuff. So what we do is, with all of our sessions, all of our projects, we have something that's verifiable in all of our projects, so that they do have something they have to describe that we see. The boring stuff that has to be in the sessions. So for example, if it's the sinking of the Titanic, I'm just saying let's say the sinking of the Titanic was a project. Well, they have to get the water. They have to get a metal boat. They have to get verifiable stuff in it. If they have the Phoenix lights, well, they have to describe Phoenix. We know it's a desert city. They have to describe a desert city. And they can't be describing Manhattan when they're doing the Phoenix lights. It has to be relatively low-level structures spread over a desert area. So, there's a lot of verifiable stuff that is there. But then, of course, once they get that, they get this big non-surface structure above Phoenix, and they go into it, and then that's keeps them interested. But they can keep these sessions going for an hour, 2, 3, whereas a brand new remote viewer burns out after a few minutes. So they don't do it like for very long.
Yeah. I mean, I must ask you this out, just personal curiosity, whether you ever did some cheekier missions or objectives, such as stealing technology from the future, trying to find little pockets from gleaning stuff from the future.
Well, that's very interesting. We haven't been teaching that very much, and we not been doing that very much. We have technology transfer procedures that are specially designed for technology transfer, and they're great. They work. The trouble is that you have to have an industry, a laboratory, some company, some government, somebody's got to follow it through. So once you describe technology from the future, you have to do something with it. And we don't have that. So we don't have companies that are wanting to have us do remote viewing to get certain things examined so that they can incorporate that. They have to, you have to work in tandem with physical scientists. So we don't use those procedures very much. This is the same as true for missing persons and stuff like that. If you have missing persons that are a result of crime scenes and stuff like that, we don't do that kind of stuff. But the reason it's so difficult to do that kind of stuff, not just because the remote viewers don't want to see all that trauma that's often associated with those cases, but you have to have police, you have to have police departments that are willing to spend the time and effort to use the information to follow things through. They have to believe the information could be real, and then they have to follow it through. And that's very difficult. You may find one police investigator wanting to see about it or something, but you really need to have a team that takes that information and does something with it. Otherwise, it's worthless to do that type of stuff. So you can't just take remote viewing by itself. You have to follow it through. You have to get the verifiable stuff that's associated with it. That's why the taking pictures of UFOs is so important to us, because first we had to build up our library of the mystery stuff. And then we had to say, okay, now the icing on the case, we're going to show you that it's real, prove it as real. And we're going to prove it by showing you how to take the video recordings of the ET ships and how many there are over your head any time of the day. So that's the proof. And once you get that proof, then you can say, oh my goodness, so then the mysteries projects are real. Because they're real for a couple of reasons. They're real because you can actually see the ships, but they're also real because you say, why are they hiding themselves? They must be up to no good. Something's not right if they're spending so much effort hiding themselves. So then the rest of it, then the rest of our projects really fall into place.
And I have 2 questions, if I may, please, Courtney. So the secret space programs, what happened to Tony, I remember being on Mars, there's domed bases, military corporations, they're doing all kinds of experiments, time travel is one of them. So bases on the moon, bases on Mars, and military space stations, do you think any of that is possible?
It's not only possible, it's absolutely true. Let me tell you a true story. In an early incarnation of Farsight, using remote viewers that were not just Farsight people, but a lot of CRV remote viewers that were trained by other people. We did a huge project quite a few years ago, but we did a huge project on an anomaly on Mars where you see the domes clear as day, 3 domes there. And these were pictures taken by the NASA observers, the NASA satellites that they sent there. And they were really high resolution and clear. And you saw the domes, and then you saw a pipeline coming out of one of the domes leading to like a nozzle, and then a jet of liquid coming out, waste material coming out of that. And you can see the shadow underneath it. We have that up on our website so you can actually see that. So we did a great project on that. And when I actually, I wrote that up into an article, and I sent it to a major journal, and it was accepted. And then 2 weeks before it was, the page proofs were done, copy editing was done, it was perfect. It was ready to go. 2 weeks before it was pulled. And I won't give too much details. I don't want to get into any lawsuits, but it was sent out for additional reviews, and it was sent to the most negative people possible. And it was sent to a reviewer, a former military person who's he was well known to be one of my nemesis. He was to be like the enemy. And everybody knew this guy and I are opposites. It was sent to him, and there's no possible way. And it was not a blind review. The guy knew who it was. And so there's no possible way that it was objective in any way, shape, or form. And the article was canned, and it was on that Martian anomaly. And I had talked to that military guy before. I said, well, what do you say about before this happened? Well, what do you say about that picture? And he did the classic thing that people do that are trying to suppress things like this. It was a glitch. It was a smudge. There was nothing. Doesn't matter what you show them. It's swamp gas. But he actually told me it was just a smudge. It was clear as day. Now, the picture itself is actually on our website. So farsight.org, and you can actually see it. And the whole project, of course, is on Farsight Prime. And anyway, we redid the entire project. And I actually published that article. They had already completely edited it and typeset it and proofread it. And so actually, the only thing, I took the actual file that they were going to publish, and I just changed the top to say, instead of the name of the journal, I put Farsight Press. And I published and I put it out on our website. But that's the type of thing is. So yes, Ileana, that stuff happens. The stuff on Mars is absolutely real. And the amount of effort to suppress that information is huge. That's the exact same reason you still have all throughout the world the idea that these ETs are not real. And what you get now is you see somebody say, oh, but we have a new picture that we think might be real. So the military will say, oh, we're going to start up a new task force to investigate. And Congress says, yes, we're going to have congressional hearings on that. We'll figure out about that. Ileana, the cameras that we could afford to take pictures of the UFOs came out last year. There's no way in the world you can possibly argue that the government didn't have better cameras way before that. They know that the ETs are right above the heads all over the place. And so they're covering this all up. And before it was just me arguing it and then you saying, well, it's, hearsay. Courtney says this, somebody else says something else. It's not that anymore. Now we're saying, no, we have absolute perfect proof now. Not that you can believe my pictures, but I'm going to show you how to take the pictures. And you take your camera, you set it up just away, and you'll see them.
Mm-hmm. And also, there's a lot of information that came out in 2017, the Nimitz incident in 2004, I believe it was, where the Navy pilots shot a craft with their gun camera on their space jet, pilot jet, and IFR, right, infrared, and it looks like a circular tic tac or something, and there later on a gimbal So what are those? Are they ours man-made reverse engineered craft, or are they
No.
the extraterrestrials?
Those are very low resolution, they're very low resolution, crappy images that are designed just to kick the can down the road. They can be spacecraft that are going at 20,000 miles an hour. Actually, in that particular article, in that particular video, the pilots actually mentioned how fast those things are going. But the military has way better images than that. So I'm so glad you raised it. That's the so-called Tic Tac videos, because the thing looked like a Tic Tac lozenge for breath freshener. So that's exactly the issue. They're releasing little tidbits like that as if that is a thing, as if that, and they know that it's grainy and fuzzy and really bad looking. They know all that. And they just know that if they release that, it'll occupy people's attention for a few months, maybe a year. And then they'll release a little bit more and say, we're going to look at a new task force to see about that. What we're saying now is, that's all crap. Get out your camera. We can buy them now. You don't have to get special military grade stuff. Now it's finally available to everybody. A couple of $1,000, you have it, and you put it up. And like I said, we have for those people who want video recordings of what to do, we have a new series called Photographing UFOs on Farsight Prime. But for those people who just want a printed version of the steps on our website, on the nonprofit's website, farsight.org, we have on the nav bar on the side at the top, the third link down, we have something called Recording UFOs, and that gives you the printed instructions for exactly how to do it, what cameras to use, what lens to use, how to get the camera converted to a full spectrum, how to put what filters to put on top of it, how to process it with Adobe Premiere to see these things.
Mhm. So the
And by the way,
minute,
and those videos are way better
yeah,
than the ones the so-called Tic Tac videos. And
But-
that's just, go
yeah,
ahead.
are they ours or are they theirs? Like, I've heard Lockheed Martin may have done this Tic Tac drone thing, that it's the newest aerospace tech.
I don't know. Those particular ones weren't flying too fast. Typically, these UFOs fly crazy fast, like crazy fast. Not all the time. Some of them are slow, but that's only temporary. But typical 20,000 miles an hour is not unusual.
I'm sure
Mhm.
you could very easily demonstrate whether it was one or the other with the remote viewing, but you already have covered that subject. So, but also, I'm not sure if you know this. You said you watched some of our material, but apparently ETs, their elders often do group remote viewings when they grow wiser, more psychically, attuned, and they do this in order to change timelines. And for them, tinkering with time and gleaning information from the future is pretty much everything. As the way they manipulate lower densities and the way they can produce a favorable outcome for themselves. I just wanted to drop that in, cool confirmation there. But also, I was curious whether you ever have conducted experiments that were too sensitive to cover publicly for Farsight, and whether you ever have done something for personal aim or gain.
Well, we have found other ways to get it for personal stuff. About doing stuff that's too too personal. Once you do this remote viewing stuff long enough, you don't really have any problems getting information about yourself. You can sense that stuff. It's like you're constantly that remote viewing state. Yes, the extraterrestrials do this. Let me comment on your first comment, Daniel, when you said, do they like to go back in time and use remote viewing and change things and things like that? Remote perception is something they do normally. That's like breathing for them. And look at the world today on Earth. You see how the big powers, Russia, China, United States, and others, how they try to have influence in other countries and manipulate things. And it's always been that way. And is there any reason that you could think of that extraterrestrials wouldn't do the same thing that they try to? And so if they have the capability of moving across space and time, of course they're going to do it. So when we think in terms of linear time and say that everything that we can manipulate is just now, just say, well, if we could manipulate things in time, would we do it? Of course we would do it. They don't, the powers don't stop at anything that they can do. If they can do it, they're going to do it. So the ETs do that. And so it's a constant struggle, a constant battle. In fact, there's good reason to believe that the things that are going on the Earth right now, with the big struggle between the authoritarian ETs and the free will ETs, is largely a consequence of something. Apparently something happens in the future that's really bad. As we have it right now, the Milky Way galaxy is the scene of what you might call a million-year holocaust that's way worse than anything that we've ever experienced on Earth. It was a bad day, a bad period of time. It was huge. Most of it is over, but it's still left over. There's still stuff left. And Earth it started out being a refuge planet for people who were trying to escape as refugees. And once it was discovered by the authoritarian ETs as a place people were escaping to, it was converted to a prison planet. Keep them here. These are the people who are causing us trouble over there. They escaped. They're here. Great. We'll just box them in. Here's they stay. And so the ETs, they follow these things. They pursue things across time and space. They have technology to get their ships across time and space, but they definitely have the ability perceptual to do that. So you have to think in terms of a bigger picture. It appears that something happens in the future that was really bad, perhaps worse than the Holocaust of the galaxy that happened in the past. And that confused people in the future. Like, how the heck did this happen? And it seems that they may have isolated it to this point, that this is where it sort of started. And if you think about it, nothing can happen anywhere in the galaxy without ISBs. ISBs animate everything. If you have 30 billion, 8 billion that are physical right now, but there's a whole bunch of others. So I'm going to pull up a number out of a hat. Let's say you have 30 billion ISBs here. 30 billion ISBs that you have as a slave population that can be used for anything. And if you look at Tony Rodriguez's book and some of the other stories that have been coming out with other people that have been in the secret space program, the SSP thing, it's totally believable that this would happen. And if it didn't happen, I'd say it's crazy that it didn't happen because they'd have the capability to do it anyway. So they're going to, obviously, something like that does happen. So that it happens because it can happen. And when you get something like that happening, and you have 30 billion people that can animate ISBs to do everything in a slave way, from prostitution to mercenary forces to workers of all types. These authoritarian types use people at will for anything that they want. Now, in a fortunate way, they sort of have a rule of 20 years before they have to cycle them back. But apparently some of them violate that rule and take them, they go on beyond that. But if you remove the constraints, basically there's some rules that apparently are due to conflicts that they've had with the free will ETs. That's with this 20-year back program. Otherwise, they wouldn't put them back in 20 years. They just keep exploiting them for as long as they want. And so, when something happened apparently in the future that was really bad, and they looked back and they sort of found that this is sort of the locus for where it sort of started. And so the 30 billion slaves, I'm saying 30 billion because I don't know how many billions, but it's many more than are physical on the planet Earth right now that are in this system. That's a huge resource. I mean, that's a huge resource. And if you have a reptilian or an Orion group that wants to expand and they have a slave force of 30 billion people, that's a lot. That's a lot. And I can see that causing a lot of trouble in the future. And I can see people in the future saying, what just happened? And then tracing it back and saying, oh, so it came from this thing originally. And that may be why there's so much emphasis right now among the free will ETs to free this planet. They really want to free the planet, but they can't do it unless the planet, this place is owned by the reptilians and the Orions. They can't do it unless the population itself rises up. And that will only happen if disclosure is the detonator that will release the explosion across the whole planet. Disclosure is absolutely necessary. And the ETs, the free will ETs, are doing everything they possibly can do to wake the planet up. They're fiddling with the media, they're fiddling with the stuff that comes out of Hollywood, they're fiddling with writers, they're fiddling with art. And of course, I can absolutely tell you they're fiddling with us. We are a product of the free will ETs. So I've released that as being open now. Now you know where we side from. But I'm not saying that the authoritarian types are bad people. They're just different people. They believe in organizing society in a hierarchical, structural way. They have a vision and they want to have their vision work, and they know that the vision won't work unless they force people to do something. And they see people as just not understanding things. And they look at free will as chaos. What do you mean everybody's free to do whatever they want? You can't organize yourself that way. You can't just have free will people making their own decisions. That's chaos. That's how they look at it. So I'm not saying that's terrible. Who am I to judge? But I am not on that side. I don't want that. And we're trying to get to the point where the population makes a free will choice. And if they do make the free will choice, and the only thing that's needed is a detonator of disclosure, they just have to know what's been happening. And now we can prove it because we have videos and we can tell you how to make those same videos. So if you have disclosure, all that stuff will come out. And then the people really will have a free will. They will have a choice. And if they want to stay with the reptilians and the Orions, hey, it's okay. But if we can't get them to have disclosure, we have to say that's their choice then. They have, in a sense, agreed to go along with that because they knew what was happening. They chose those people as their own leaders, and they refused to look at the writing on the wall, even though we did everything possible to wake them up. And then the free will ETs are simply going to go. They're going to leave it, and they'll come up with, they're not going to abandon it completely, but they're going to go away and they'll go to a different planet, a different place in time and space, and they'll try again with a different strategy. You know, you mentioned, Daniel, that you like the project on the crucifixion ruse. That's a good point. That was an attempt by the free will ETs to insert some new ideas into a fundamentally slave society and to let those ideas percolate through the centuries to change the society so that you could have an open society that would be amenable to working with the free will ETs. There was some military confrontation back in those days as well to dampen down the authoritarian ETs' capabilities to do things. The authoritarian ETs were the ones who did the pyramids, the Egyptian pyramids, and that truly was a slave society. That's how they would normally run the planet, just like total slaves working in dirt. So there were some military confrontations that sort of stopped that from happening on that level. But the whole idea of the ideas that were brought in back in the old crucifixion days were, let's put some ideas in there and let them percolate through the society and it didn't work. It failed. The authoritarian ETs were able to corrupt it and into a situation where they made Jesus into a god. And then they created a whole bunch of saints to replace the Roman gods. And it was a one-on-one. They had a Roman and Greek god for everybody to do every little thing, and they had a saint for everybody. They just translated everything into a new package, and it was on, and everything was back to normal. And then they had a church structure that was hierarchical, that had rigid belief systems, and it went with the Protestant stuff as well as the Catholic stuff. Rigid belief system. And so the free will ET said that just didn't work. This slow thing. The difference between what happened then and what's happening now is that they're trying to do it fast. The reptilians and the Orions, the authoritarian ETs, are able to control the situation when it's slow. They can fiddle with it. They can manipulate the population. And the idea now is if the disclosure process happens quickly, in an age where you have mass communication with the internet, and you have social media, it can happen so fast that the reptilians and the Orions, they can't handle it. It would overload the system, and then you get a blow up on the planet, and then the population would rise up. That's the big difference between the old days and the new days. We're trying to get them to do it fast. And there's been many occasions where they tried to infuse ideas in the Himalayas with the Vedic society. But that was pre-Hindu. The ideas that came out of Buddhism. There's a lot of attempts that have been made, but they were all oriented around changing things slowly, and it just doesn't work. The authoritarian guys figured out how to control it. That's the difference between now and then. We'll see if it works, and there's no guarantee. I can't tell you, just wait, you'll see. I don't know. Neither side knows. As far as I understand, exactly what's been happening here now has never happened before. This is a brand new attempt to do something different. And the exact thing, it's not a cookie cutter approach like turning on a light and you flick the switch and the light goes on. And you're sure that it's going to go on. We really don't know exactly what's going to happen. So it's a struggle. It's a war. And it's a very interesting war because the shootout part is only a part of last resort. It's a war being fought in the minds of people.
Truly, yeah. And about the ISBs, or I think the Black Ops refer to it as consciousness. It's the biggest currency. That's something you stress as well, which goes hand in hand with the SSP lore. And the regressives, ETs, do capture them upon death, but now also humans do that. And not just that, but apparently they also use time travel to even pick up dead and dying humans from the past. So it goes back. This is bottomless, the subject. It's time now to just go on to the checkmate part of it, where no one can refute it. I was wondering if I could just go really briefly. We run out of time, but about just some of the most startling finds from Farsight that also connect with the SSP, because this is what most of our channels deal with. For example, you found out that Operation Highjump was actually a ploy, and that the Germans weren't that developed by the time. It was they were held by, among others, a rogue faction of Aryans, and they were behind the shooting down.
That was really interesting. Yeah, Operation Highjump was really fascinating because this much we know is historical fact. The Nazis were defeated in Europe and the European arena by the Allies. And when they got there, they found out that there was something in Antarctica, a base. And Admiral Byrd was sent with an entire, aircraft carriers go with the fleet. You never send an aircraft carrier by itself. It has to have a repair ship. It has to have destroyers. It has to have submarines. It has to have aircraft. Typically, there are 13 boats with any aircraft carrier. Aircraft carrier plus 12 other boats. They always go as a flotilla. So the story that was given officially is that they wanted to do a reconnaissance out there to see if there might be a nice place to put an airfield. Now you send one boat and maybe one airplane, okay, to do a little reconnaissance. You don't send an entire flotilla armed with thousands of troops, armed to the teeth, 13 ships, aircraft, everything, with an Admiral Byrd running the whole thing. You don't send them down just to do a little reconnaissance, but they send them down there, and they got their ass beat. I mean, they just got whipped. And what happened basically, that's where the remote viewing sort of recreates. Now, Admiral Byrd had actually said some stuff about it afterwards, but he was shut down. But he said some stuff in South America, saying basically that the next big threat to the world and the country is going to come out of Antarctica. But basically, what happened is they had a Nazi base down there that was set up by the reptilians. There were Nazis in the base. Apparently, the Nazis no longer like to call themselves Nazis. They call themselves Germans. But they had them in the base. As far as the Americans were concerned, it was a Nazi base. It wasn't a reptilian base. It was a Nazi base. So when Admiral Byrd went down there with his aircraft carrier, his submarines, his destroyers and everything, they got their ass whipped. And they had ships, flying saucer type ships, come out of the ocean, whoosh, and just bombard. They knocked the air fleet. They knocked the fleet out. They had to retreat. They were just completely smashed. And after they retreated, apparently some of the aircraft, some of the flying saucers buzzed the White House. So what basically happened is that the story that the Americans were told is that it was the Nazis flying those ships, those UFOs, but it wasn't. The reptilians didn't trust the Nazis to do something like that. They didn't have the training to fly those things. They had a humanoid type being Aryan type. They actually look Aryan, blonde hair, blue-eyed type things, but they were ETs from another place that worked with the reptilians. They were the ones actually flying the UFOs. The Nazis were not yet at that level to be able to handle that. So these Aryan types came in and they were the ones that were flying the UFOs, but the Americans thought they were Nazis because they thought it was a Nazi base. And then when they buzzed the White House with those, the basic bottom line is the Americans were told, oh my gosh, in a matter of minutes, the Nazis we defeated in Europe can actually knock out the entire American military across the entire continent. What are we going to do? And that's when the reptilians came in, the Orions, they came in and they had meetings with civilian leadership and military leadership and said, we understand you have a problem. You have a Nazi problem. That's terrible. Tell you what we'll do. We'll take care of it for you. No problem. We're friends. We're friends, aren't we? We'll take care of it for you. Just sign here on the dotted line. And that allowed them to, and they lied on the contracts. They said they're going to be abducting some people. They didn't use the word abducting, but mostly people have mental retardation problems, health issues and stuff like that. Only be a few scattered people, but they wrote that down. And so the Americans signed it. And that gave them legal right to build their bases, and they went way beyond what was originally done. But you see, the reason they needed those things signed is because of the free will ETs. If the free will ETs didn't have an agreement, they didn't see an agreement, they would have just knocked them out, right? And so what happens is the free will ETs right this very moment, the free will ETs have a lot more invested in the solar system in terms of ships, weaponry, firepower than the authoritarian ETs. The free will ETs could win in a toe-to-toe battle. The big problem they're worried about is that if they attacked the authoritarian ETs, the authoritarian ETs would have no qualms at all about just destroying the entire planet, just blowing it up, because the death traps are still operating. They just scoop up everybody's ISBs and take them someplace else. So, and also it would be not a bad thing to destroy the entire planet, because then it teaches everybody a lesson. you mess with us, we're going to turn the thing into dirt. So you don't get your people back anyway. So, you know, the authoritarian ETs have sort of got everybody over a barrel right now. However, if you have a revolution from below, if you have the masses rise up, then you have the authoritarian ETs boxed in. They have the free will ETs, which are numerically superior in terms of firepower and everything. And then you also have their masses rising up. The authoritarian ETs have no alternative than just run, just to get out. And they'll pack up and they'll go and they'll try something else. So that's the situation we are in right now. In the Operation Highjump situation, the Americans were duped. It was simple duped. A simple thing was set up to make it look like there were Nazis in Antarctica that could conquer the entire US military in the blink of an eye. The Americans were never told that the reptilians were the ones, that the ETs were the ones who set it up in the first place. And then after the agreements were done, they took the Nazis off the planet. They didn't need them on the planet anymore. They didn't need the Nazi base anymore. The only thing that was needed was to scare the devil out of the Americans so they'd sign the agreements. And they needed those things signed so that free will ETs wouldn't intervene. But they had agreements. And apparently the agreements are wearing thin, and free will ETs are insisting that there's either got to be a new agreement or they got to get out. So that's why they're pushing for new agreements. The old agreements are wearing thin. And what we see now with the political situation building in the world today, it appears as though if it's being manipulated to cause some type of world potential Armageddon type of a threat, so that the political authorities might sign new agreements, giving them a new lease on life. And if they sign those new agreements with the authoritarian ETs, in exchange for calming everything down, then it's over. The free will ETs will withdraw from the system. Now, you have to understand that the authoritarian ETs are instigating the problems on this planet the exact same way they instigated the problems in Antarctica in Operation Highjump. They're causing the problems so that they can then offer to fix the problems. And when they fix the problems, it's not a big deal. They just mentally manipulate a couple leaders. And suddenly you have China making peace again with Taiwan. You have Russia getting out of Ukraine. Well, everything's hunky-dory and back to normal. They can fix those things in a blink of an eye because they started the things in a blink of an eye. So that's what that Operation Highjump was. It was a great example for how to manipulate a population. And that's the other reason you need disclosure. Those types of tricks can happen all the time in the absence of disclosure. It's only if you have disclosure that the population will be alerted to the fact that that's a possibility. And when that becomes a possibility and someone tries to pull something like that off, the population will say, hold your horses. What are you trying to do? And then other people will say, you're probably being tricked. But that's what happened. The Americans were tricked. Operation Highjump made it look like, from the Americans' perspective, that the Nazis could win World War II with one base coming out of Antarctica. And the reptilians said, no problem, we'll fix it for you. Yeah, that's how that works. And that looks like what we're heading for right now, a similar type of setup.
And I've heard that there's still reptilians in Antarctica. There's bases in Antarctica. Is that real, or is that true, or is that's just hype?
Ileana, honest, they're everywhere. They're all over the place. They're on American soil, actually underneath American soil. There's no place that they aren't. Those agreements gave them carte blanche to go every place. And so you can assume they're in Antarctica, but it's not like a special place. They're probably, I don't know, but they're probably under Atlanta as well. I mean, there are places. They have their locations. And occasionally you hear something on the internet where someone says, no, they all been chased out. The good guys chased them all out. That's just not the case at all.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very popular theory, yeah. And but the Draco, it's interesting that they probably don't need too many numbers, because even in the Highjump case, they only did a bit of diplomacy with the Germans and then they left. They actually were very bored to interact with the fearful humans. And in the case of their playing around with the presidents later on in the 50s in America. That was done in avatar bodies. Operating in secrecy is their specialty, and also just so happens that the reptilians are behind the mind control of the popes, that the 4 popes that you remote viewed, as well as a certain president of Russia.
Yeah, we had a whole project on President Putin, which was really interesting. So there's a lot of mental manipulation among human leadership. That's one of the reasons you can't get anything done from the human leadership. You've got to get the revolution from below, because the human leadership's been compromised. Either they've been bought off, bribed, whatever, or just been mentally manipulated. David M. Jacobs, a former professor from Temple, he calls it neural engagement, where they go into the mind and they mentally manipulate it so that the people do things. They become like puppets on a string. That's very common, especially now. The free will ETs don't do that, but the authoritarian ETs do that routinely. The closest thing that you can get to it from the free will ETs is to insert ideas in the heads of scriptwriters. But then the scriptwriters have to voluntarily say, oh, that was a great idea. I mean, they go to sleep and they wake up in the morning and say, wow, I have a great idea. We're going to have it's going to be a new species. We'll call them Klingons. So, that's what the free will ETs do. They insert ideas, but then they leave it up to the free will of the scriptwriters to incorporate those things. But then you can get great movies that actually have a lot of truth behind it. If you look at the Matrix movies, it's so close to reality, where you have a society that doesn't even know it's being manipulated, that it doesn't even know it's a slave society. And then you have a few people trying to break through and break the system down and release everybody. That's very close to reality of what's happening. So all these ideas, these are coming out of the free will ETs. The authoritarian ETs have no interest in that kind of stuff coming out, but they can't stop it. So that's, yeah.
And a question for Courtney. In the secret space program, there's the 20 and back, 60 and back. How does that quantum leap time dilation work? Did you see anything in your remote viewing, how the time traveling aspect works, how you can end up on Mars, the moon? How can they time dilate people to have these 20s and 60s and back?
Well, it's a pretty simple thing. Once you pop somebody out of a body, you have the ISB. And then the ISB is the person. And the person is just who they are. They have full memories, they have everything. And then you can plop them into any other body you want. Now, sometimes, and then when you plop them into any other body you want, or use the same body, then you have a situation where you have to reinsert them back in. So you've got to reinsert them back in time. So let's say you've done something for 20 years. You've got to go back in time to the point where you took them in the first place and then reinsert them minus their memories. So that's very common for ET technology. So you can say, okay, well, how can that possibly work? But that type of stuff happens in quantum mechanics all the time, where you have something, the old two-slit experiment, or the delayed choice experiment is probably the best one to look at, where they have particles going through a system, and they do something downstream in the system. I won't go through the details of the delayed choice experiment, but they do something downstream in the system, and they observe a result. But that result required that something upstream in the system happened before the measurement. So in order to get the measurement that they got downstream, something had to have happened prior. So they forced the thing to happen prior in order to get the measurement at the end, but they did it by messing with the measurement at the end. So in a sense, they're manipulating time. They're manipulating something to happen before in order to get something to happen at the end, but they do the manipulation at the end, not before. So what you get with time stuff And remote viewing is very clear on that, that the ability to perceive it works across time and space. And from a physical perspective, from the perspective of physics, that's equivalent to moving matter across time and space, because physicists don't look at information as just stuff you think about. Information is anything that's organized into a pattern. And what physicists have discovered, and this is not in dispute, is if you take any information, any organization of anything, and put it into a sealed system, so it's completely sealed from the environment, and then you let entropy take its place and just let the system, the organization deteriorate, energy is released. So that means that the organization, the information, is a form of energy. Now, E equals mc squared. So energy is mass. They're equivalent. They're just a scalar of c squared, telling the difference. So what you actually have is, when you're doing remote viewing, is you're sending information across time and space. And that's equivalent to sending energy across time and space. And energy is a form of matter, or matter is a form of energy. So you're actually sending matter across time and space. And that violates all types of thinking that normal physicists think about. Right now, that's changing. The majority of physicists, about 80% of them, I guess, still cling to the old way of thinking. But they're slowly dying off and retiring. And being replaced by younger physicists who have been aware of this type of stuff from the beginning. And best estimates are that about 20% of physicists have bought onto the new ideas. So we're waiting for the retirement and generational replacement to take place. But yeah, you get movement across time and space. So you just have to say, we've had technology for what, 100 years, 150 years, something like that. Imagine 1,000,000 years. That's a huge level of technology is going to be done. And so the idea of moving interstellar distances and moving across time and space, that's just something people are going to work on. So you know what type of thing is going to happen. And since we can already see evidence that it does happen by remote viewing, we're removing information, thus energy, thus mass across time and space, they're obviously going to have ships that can do stuff like that. So the 20 and back or 16 and back programs, yeah, there's nothing, it's impossible for me to think of why that wouldn't happen. I mean, they're able to do it, so why wouldn't they do it? They will do it. So that is a very, it's like, it's not that I can say I can prove it happened, but I can't fathom a reason why it wouldn't happen, given everything else we know about the ability to move things across time and space, and everything else we know about the authoritarian ETs. There is no reason why it wouldn't happen. So it's very, very believable. And if it doesn't happen, you'd have to come up with a really good reason of why it didn't happen, given the fact that they can do it.
In fact, I was wondering if you were willing to embark on future SSP remote viewing sessions, because they're countless, and I could list like 10. But also, one of the interesting things that your work reflects, that is also a feature of the SSP conclusion, that is that humans are actually just bit players in all this, and actually much of the leadership that is well intended does want out, and is just an unwilling mind-controlled participant. So this, I want to tie this back to the fact that the seeming way out of this is the Galactic Federation, which is determined to fight these regressives, but is not actually unanimous in assisting Earth at this moment. And you said that, you claimed that raising awareness and pushing disclosure is a way for us to boost our chances with them. And could you explain why?
You have to understand, Daniel, it's a great question, that the free will ET's hands are really tied. They can't force the situation because this is a planet that's already occupied and run by their authoritarian ETs. They can't force it, because if they tried to force it, and you're talking about like an invasion, If they did that, then at the blink of an eye before the authoritarian ETs would have the human collaborators and everybody say, oh my gosh, these are ETs that are invading. We have to defend. And then you'd have all of the human planet rising up against the free will ETs who they'd see as an enemy who are trying to invade, because there'd be a shootout. So the free will ETs really can't do this unless the human population wakes up and says, oh, so that's what's been going on, and then demands an alliance with the free will ETs. And then you won't have this battle where the free will ETs have to, the only way the free will ETs could do it now is if they invaded, managed somehow to conquer the authoritarian ETs without having the authoritarian ETs blow up the planet. That's a trick. Without having the authoritarian ETs destroy the planet, the free will ETs would have to destroy it. It would have to destroy the authoritarian ETs, stop them from destroying the planet, and then they'd have to re-educate the entire human population forcefully. You're thinking of like the re-education programs that went on in China during Mao Zedong's days. Like, how do you, then the free will ETs would be no worse than the authoritarian ETs. You have, it won't work. The free will ETs don't do that kind of stuff. That's just not in their DNA. It's just not in their way of thinking. They can help, but they need human population to want it. They need it, and they're only talking about disclosure. They're only talking about tell the people the truth, to quote Bob Marley. That's all they're talking about. They're just saying, just tell the people the truth, and then let's see what happens. But if they can't, if the human population, you have to understand, the free will ETs have invested a lot on this planet. Do you realize how different we are than what we were back in the Egyptian pyramid building days? So first, the military capabilities of authoritarian ETs have been knocked down. They're still controlling the planet, but they're not running the place like it was back in the ancient Egyptian slave building, pyramid building days. So now we have technology that's starting to grow. We have buildings that look a lot more like the buildings that you see elsewhere in the galaxy, tall skyscrapers. We have the emergence of technology, and it's rapidly growing technology. This stuff is stuff that the authoritarian ETs wouldn't voluntarily want to happen. Now, it's not threatening the authoritarian ETs. The authoritarian ETs, if the free will ETs weren't there, the authoritarian ETs could knock out all the technology in a blink of an eye. But so we're not like militarily a threat to the authoritarian ETs, but nonetheless, it's in that direction. But you also have the transformation of the populace through the mass media to understand space travel, warp drive, to understand all types of aspects of planetary wars in the galaxy, the whole matrix concept of a population being subdued. You have a lot of ideas that came out, and the population is being prepared to think of these things. That's what the free will ETs have done. So they freed up the planet enough so the technology can start to be reemerging. And now we have technology of cameras that can photograph and video record the UFOs. That's all a result of free will ETs sort of protecting the planet so that we can actually have this development, but also inserting these ideas. And so the ETs, the free will ETs have done a lot, but now it's push time. Now this is the time when we have to see if it's actually going to work. Now we have to do disclosure. And Farsight's role in all of this is simply to use consciousness to resurrect the true history of the planet. And that's why we have all our mysteries projects. If you go through all of our mysteries project, it rewrites everything you wrote in the history books. And it all makes sense too. A lot of it that's written in the histories book is just mind-boggling. It just doesn't make sense at all. So that's what Farsight's role is, to create a witness of what actually happened in the history of the planet. But disclosure is the next step, Daniel and Ileana. It's the next step. And if without that, Without that, nothing will work.
Yeah. And I also enjoy how it confirms much of Farsight material that 90% of what we interpret or what we look at as folklore is actually deeply rooted in reality. And it shows why, but it has been deeply distorted, of course. I just wanted to make one last point about reptilians, that even by your remote viewers' admission, not all of them are regressive, but the ones that are, of course, are very insidious and are always looking for mouthpieces for good, positive, reputation. But this was an interesting find that they can only be thwarted, the negative ones, by a civilization with high psychic capabilities, which you derive from looking at positive timelines that are in the future. That evolved ETs are more spiritual oriented than technology. This is what this proves, right?
Well, in order to gain freedom, you have to have a vision of what is possible, of what is good. You have to know what you're looking for. You have to know what you want. So it's the old law of attraction stuff that came out of the Abraham stuff from the Esther and Jerry Hicks stuff, which is in order to know what you want, you have to know what you don't want. You have to have contrast. So the good stuff that you're talking about right now is actually very important. You have to have a vision of what you could have, what you do want. The one thing that I want to say that's sort of a good take-home message is that humanity has an awful lot to offer the galaxy because we know what we don't want. Once you have disclosure, you have a population that is got the highest concentration of geniuses and artists and creatives anywhere in the galaxy. And we've been repressed. We know what we don't want. Once you have disclosure, the rest of the galaxy will look at us and say, wow, look at them. They're bursting. That's what they do want. And the rest of the galaxy will be inspired. So you're looking at your question is from the perspective of we have to be inspired to know what we want from the good guys. But the reality is once you free humanity, humanity will be a note of inspiration that's unprecedented in this galaxy. And everybody will say, if they can do it, we can do it. That's the role of humanity. That's why it's so important. If we can do it, everyone will say they can do it as well. It's a big deal. It's much more than just freeing the planet. There's a large section of the galaxy that needs help, and they need to be able to look at us, just the way your question said, can we look at others? They need to be able to look at us and say, if they can do it, if humans can do it on Earth, then we can do it too. And if we look at this from this perspective, Daniel, let's look at it from hip hop. Hip hop started in the African American community in the East Coast, and then it went to the West Coast and so on like that. But it came out of the real hood. It came out of the tough times in inner city environments that were severely repressed. And when it did come out, it had so much vibrancy. Now, it came out from within a repressed community, the African American community in the hood, in the poor areas. And when it came out, you then had it inspiring Caucasian youths everywhere in the United States. You had Eminem coming out, and then you had hip hop sort of reverberating. And it wasn't just rap music; it was the whole expression of b-boying and graffiti, and the whole signature 5 elements of rap, of the whole of whole hip hop. It became an artistic boom. Now, hip hop then transcended across the entire planet. So if you go to Thailand, the rebels in artistic form, the musicians, they're singing, they're rapping in Thai, in the Thai language. But if you just forget the fact that you can't understand it because it's Thai, they're using all the same mannerisms of the typical rap, gangster rap, and hip and rap singers that you see today. They are using all the same hand motions, all the same the dressing stuff. In fact, if you didn't know the language, you just sort of assume that they're Asian versions of African Americans coming out of the hood. And then I go to Africa a lot. Swahili rap is incredible. It is translated. It became so the African American experience translated into an artistic expression, which then became something that was almost universal, and it popped up in cultures all over the place. Well, that's what you have on the whole planet. You have a whole planet that's been repressed, not just an African American community, but everybody, the whole planet's in a prison. And then you have the rest of the galaxy looking at us. And what's going to happen is when we free this planet, everybody on the planet is going to become an intellectual and a cultural and a creative powerhouse that will literally drive the whole galaxy in a direction of freedom. It's big. I mean, it's really big. And the very asset that you had with the reptilians and the Orions thinking they have a 30 billion slave force, imagine flipping that and you have a 30 billion revolutionary creative genius force spreading out throughout the entire galaxy. Do you realize how big that is? That could win the galaxy more than any sizable military force could ever do it. That's what's at stake.
In fact, my only slight worry is that our creativity will get slightly dulled once we do get our freedom, but that's just, superfluous. I'm sure we have been through enough millennia of oppression to enjoy a bit of freedom for once. But yeah, I really appreciate it. And I wanted to maybe throw it to Ileana if you wanted to say something for takeaway message.
Yeah, and the more we disclose this stuff, the more we disclose about these extraterrestrials, the secret space programs, that's disclosure in and of itself coming forward. These experiencers, they're normal people, some military, some not, some just normal creative human beings sharing what happened to them, their experiences. And we're going into a different normal in this reality. It's not your 1980s, 1970s, early 2000s normal. This is like the 2020s and 2030s normal. It's different. It's a different environment where the truth comes out, and the truth needs to come out. We need to know this stuff to realize we can be free. This is our freedom we're fighting for.
Yeah. Yeah, Ileana, there's only one thing I want to add to this. So much when the SSP program is focused on is like military people, but the slavery has affected everybody. Do you know how many prostitutes that are abused, that are recruited into that same program? Human trafficking of all types. And I'm not talking just women being prostitutes, children. It's
even animals.
It goes everywhere. It's a huge level. Now, it may be that the reason we're hearing so much about the military side of the so-called 20 years back is because those people are used to fighting. Those people they're used to fighting. And so maybe it's sort of more natural for them to come forward and talk about struggle, because that's what they did for 20 years. But let's not forget that there's other people out there as well that have, fundamentally their personalities have been changed. Even if a lot of the memories have been erased, you can't really erase the memories. You can suppress the memories, but there's still something there. And it is possible for people to get those memories back at some point. Remember, eternity is a very long time. So people can get those memories back, even if they can't get them back now. They can get those memories back. So those things happen to those people. So this secret space program is sort of really interesting. The SSP program is really interesting. And your efforts, Ileana and Daniel, are so important because it's the beginning. It's not the end. It's the beginning of a process that has to continue. And once the disclosure process happens, people then have to say, well, who else was affected? And then how many women are going to come forward? How many people, when are going to start remembering what happened to them when they were kids? What about people that were thrown into just labor camps where they just had to work? Yeah, a lot of people are going to need help in sort of processing all of that stuff. So what you're doing, actually, Daniel and Ileana, is you're actually doing something very important and pioneering. But but it's not the end.
I
It's the
don't feel like I've
beginning.
even started, honestly.
It's the beginning. It's the beginning. So you're more important than you think. And the biggest argument against the skeptics saying, "Oh, this is crazy," is the people are deluded. This stuff doesn't happen. Is once you accept the fact that the ETs are real, and we can prove it now, we can show that anybody with any with the appropriate camera over anybody's house in the middle of the day, we can show them the ETs. Then you have to ask, why wouldn't it happen? It makes no sense to say it wouldn't happen. You have to explain why it wouldn't happen, because if they can do it, they will do it.
Mhm.
Agreed.
Agreed, yes.
Well, that was a lot of food for thought. Although honestly, I didn't get to even half of the topics I wanted to cover, but hopefully we will pick it up again at some point. But I just
I can come
wanted
back.
to.
I can come
Oh,
back.
Yes,
that'd be great.
please. That would be great.
Meanwhile, I encourage people to dig deeper into the Farsight archives, because it's going to keep you busy for a good few weeks there, even if you do nothing else.
It's huge.
Yeah. So it's farsightprime.com.
Farsightprime.com is where we have everything. It's our streaming service, and we had to do that in order to defend ourselves against, being removed from social media. So we had to make sure we had something, and so it's our own streaming service, and it's the amount of content is unbelievable. It's just the amount of content is huge, including instructional videos on how to do this stuff for those people who want to just sort of dabble in it or start training themselves in how to do this. But now we also have the process of instructing people how to take video recordings. And we also have our nonprofit website, farsight.org, where you can get a whole bunch of stuff, but you can also get a lot of printed materials. That's a good website for printed materials. Our farsightprime.com is great for video, like Hulu, Netflix, Paramount Plus, things like that. But farsight.org is especially good for printed material. And we have printed versions of how to take video recordings of alien spacecraft.
Yeah, I think you have the right approach with doing video. These days, it's more compelling than just reading, and also has a lot of interesting visuals, and higher production values. So yeah, I would say to just keep up the great research, and hopefully we can catch up maybe, I don't know, a year or so. And yeah, till then, just stay safe.
Thank you so much both for inviting me, and I can come back whenever you want. So it's great, and it's an honor, in fact, to be with both of you.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much, Courtney. It was a pleasure to meet you.
Great.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye now.